Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to do a deep dive into sports talk using a podcast script for English language learners as our source material. I think it's kind of brilliant, actually.
Yeah, using something aimed at English language learners is a great way to remind ourselves that sports really can be a universal language. And that's something the script highlights well. But like any language, it has its own special vocabulary.
Exactly. And that can be kind of a barrier to entry, even for native English speakers. Like, I consider myself pretty fluent in sports talk, but I still get tripped up on some of the more specific terms.
Oh, absolutely.
Remember that time I tried to explain the infield fly rule to my friend who'd never watched baseball?
Oh, yeah.
It was a disaster.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
And it really shows how, even simple words, simple terms can turn into jargon when you're talking about a particular sport. So in this deep dive, we're going beyond just basic vocabulary.
Okay, so beyond Sports 101. I like it.
Exactly. We're going to be exploring how these words function within different sports, how they're used by fans, and how they shape the way we think and talk about the games.
So more like a masterclass in sports communication.
Yeah, think of it that way. We're going to be unpacking the language of sports and how it creates a sense of community among fans, but also how it can be used to really break down the strategy of a game.
I'm all in. So where should we start? Should we pick a specific sport or do a broader overview first?
Let's start broad and narrow down. The script looks at soccer, basketball, tennis, and baseball. Each one has its own unique set of jargon, its own flow and rhythm to the language.
It's true. You wouldn't describe a slam dunk in basketball using the same words as a home run in baseball. It just wouldn't sound right.
Exactly. Even a word like fan can have slightly different meanings depending on the sport. In soccer, for example, the term fan often implies a more die-hard, almost tribal kind of loyalty.
Right.
While in tennis, it might suggest a sense of appreciation or admiration, but maybe not that same level of fanaticism.
I hadn't really thought about it, but I'm starting to see that this is about more than just dictionary definitions.
Yeah.
It's really understanding the culture and history that's baked into the language of each sport.
You got it, and that's where things get really fascinating. When you understand the nuances of sports vocabulary, you start to see how it reflects broader social trends, cultural values, and even political ideologies.
Hold on, political ideologies.
Oh, absolutely.
You're saying there's politics hidden in the way we talk about sports.
Think about the language used to describe athletes from different countries, or how certain sports are marketed to appeal to specific groups. Even just the phrase playing fair can be loaded with cultural assumptions.
Wow, I never even considered that. So how do we even begin to uncover these hidden layers of meaning? Do we need to become like linguistic detectives or something?
Well, maybe not detectives, but a healthy sense of curiosity and a willingness to question our assumptions will definitely help. Luckily, we have the script as a starting point.
Okay, let's get into it then. I am ready to decode the secret language of sports.
Let's do it. It's really interesting how sports language often reflects those broader social trends we were just talking about. The script mentions it, but doesn't really dive in.
Okay, I'm curious. Give me an example.
Well, just think about terms like clutch or mental toughness. We use them all the time to praise athletes. But these words, while seemingly neutral, can actually reinforce some gender stereotypes.
You mean like the idea that men are supposed to be stoic and not show their emotions under pressure?
Exactly. And on the other hand, when women athletes display those same qualities, sometimes they're labeled aggressive or unsportsmanlike. It's a double standard.
I never thought about it that way. It's like the language itself is shaping our perceptions of gender roles in sports.
Right. And that's just one example. I mean, we could talk about how sports language has been used to promote nationalism, to sell products, to create rivalries that extend way beyond the field.
Okay, so this is way more complex than I realized. So how do we navigate this linguistic minefield? Do we have to constantly analyze every word we use?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I think the key is awareness, understanding the power of language and using it thoughtfully, recognizing that words can have unintended consequences.
So it's more about being mindful of the baggage that words carry than policing our language.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Once you start to see the complexity of sports language, then you can play with it, you can subvert it, use it to challenge assumptions and start new conversations.
I like that. So where do we go from here? We've talked about the social and cultural side of sports language, but what about the practical applications? How can we actually use this to have better sports conversations?
Yeah, well, the script offers some good advice. It emphasizes understanding basic vocabulary, which is obviously important, but it goes beyond just definitions. It encourages listeners to use those words to tell stories, analyze games, really express their opinions and engage in debates.
Right, so it's not enough to know what a goal is or a home run. You have to be able to use those terms to create a narrative to explain what happened.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where understanding strategy, knowing the history of the sport, and being able to talk about specific players and their strengths and weaknesses, all that comes in.
It's like learning a new language, I guess. You start with the basics, but then you have to immerse yourself in the culture, learn the nuances, and find your own voice within that language.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And just like with any language, it takes time and practice,
Mm.
but it's definitely worth the effort.
Speaking of practice, maybe we should try putting some of this into action. Pick a sport, analyze a game, debate a call.
I'm up for it.
Mm.
How about soccer? It's constantly evolving, has this rich history, and a global fan base. The script also mentions some terms like offside and penalty that we could break down.
Perfect. I just watched a Premier League match that ended in a penalty shootout. It was intense. Maybe we could analyze the key moments, the strategies, and, talk about whether the ref made the right calls.
It sounds like a plan. But before we get into that specific match, maybe we should take a step back and talk about the offside rule in general.
Ooh, the offside rule, yes. I had so many arguments about that one. I'm always confused about who's supposed to be where and when.
Yeah, it definitely trips people up, even seasoned soccer fans. And that's because it's not just about the position of the players, but also about their intent and the timing of their movements. It's meant to encourage attacking play and prevent players from just hanging out near the opponent's goal.
Oh, okay, so it's not just about drawing lines on the field. It's about understanding how the rule impacts the flow and the spirit of the game.
Exactly. And that's why it's always being debated, especially when it comes to those crucial goals that are disallowed. It gets people talking about fairness, interpretations, and what beautiful play really means.
You picked a good one to start with. This isn't just a technicality. It's like a window into the soul of soccer.
I think so, yeah. It's a great example of how understanding a single word or rule can lead to a much deeper appreciation of the game.
All right, let's do it. Break it down for me. Explain it like I'm 5, but, with a bit more sophistication.
Challenge accepted. So imagine you're watching a soccer match.
Wow. You know what? After that explanation, I think I'm finally starting to get the offside rule. It's way more complicated than it seems on the surface.
Yeah, it really is. But it just shows how even a single rule can totally change the way a sport is played, how people see it.
Totally. Like, without the offside rule, soccer would be, I don't know, so different. Maybe more chaotic, more about individual players rather than the team working together.
That's a great point. It just goes to show how even these small details can impact the entire sport.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive. From basic sports terms to, the really depth cultural stuff.
Yeah, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about. They have the tools to understand sports conversations, but also to really participate in them, to analyze games and form their own opinions.
And hopefully they can appreciate just how interesting and complex sports language can be.
For sure, because sports are so much more than just games. They're stories, they're full of drama, they reflect our culture and values.
And the language we use when we talk about sports is a huge part of that.
Couldn't agree more. So to everyone listening, I encourage you to really embrace the challenge of mastering sports language. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to debate, to explore the nuances.
Yeah, it's not about knowing all the trivia. It's about connecting with people, sharing your passion, and understanding the world a little better through sports.
Beautifully said. So go out there, engage with the world of sports, and let the conversations begin.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.